The fact that Nicole Hannah-Jones has been honored with a MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant and a Pulitzer Prize, and has had the New York Times backing her error-riddled and fundamentally mistaken 1619 project as a curriculum throughout the United States tells us that we live in an intellectually degenerate moment in history. The fact that this low IQ cheap imitation of some 70s version of brown sugar has been granted an endowed chair, despite no doctorate, and is heading a new center with $20 million in funding at Howard University highlights a total collapse of intellectual standards in this country. What we are seeing is a purely politically motivated, white guilt, elitist pandering epidemic, virtually dooming mankind's advancements in sciences and innovation, setting us back decades, at least. Yesterday, when featured on Meet the Press, she demonstrated genuine intellectual mediocrity at its best. Let's just say she packed a boatload of bullshit in the clip that we will watch right after this quick commercial break to pay some bills. Friends, I'm going to point out the obvious. It seems like big government and big tech are trying to destroy America. Everything they touch turns into a disaster. Pretty soon the whole system will fall apart, and the first thing to fall will be the food supply chain. So, do you have enough emergency food to get through a serious long-term crisis where you can't get food at the grocery store? Most people don't, and they'll panic when the time comes. That is why the smart move now is to get long-term storage emergency food before things go bad. I highly recommend My Patriot Supply. They've served millions of American families and have over 41,000 4-star and 5-star reviews. Their mission is your survival, and right now you can save 25% on a 4-week kit of emergency food that will save the day, probably soon. Order a starter kit for each member of your family and they'll ship everything quickly and discreetly to your door. Go to preparewithresurgence.com so you can claim your 4-week emergency food kit and save 25% in the process. That's preparewithresurgence.com or hit that link in the description box.
I've thought about this and I know that if government says this is our history, people are going to say, I'm not letting government historians decide what our history is. This seems to be a real challenge in an open society, is how do we get agreement on this, especially when parents want to have a Virginia governor's race was arguably decided on the strength of how influential should parents be on curriculum. How do we do this?
Well, I would say the governor's race in Virginia was decided based on the success of a right-wing propaganda campaign that told white parents that they needed to fight against their children being indoctrinated as being called racist. But that was a propaganda campaign. And there are a lot of Black parents in Virginia. There are a lot of Latino parents in Virginia, and they were not being featured in that coverage. And what they wanted for their kids' education, which is more teaching about race, more teaching about the history of racism, seem to have fallen on deaf ears. So I think we should frame that question properly. And I don't really understand this idea that parents should decide what's being taught. I'm not a professional educator. I don't have a degree in social studies or science. We send our children to school because we want them to be taught by people who have an expertise in the subject area. And that is not my job. When the governor or the candidate said that he didn't think parents should be deciding what's being taught in school, he was panned for that. But that's just the fact. This is why we send our children to school and don't homeschool, because these are the professional educators who have the expertise to teach social studies, to teach history, to teach science, to teach literature. And I think we should leave that to the educators. Yes, we should have some say. But school is not about simply confirming our worldview. Schools should teach us to question. They should teach us how to think, not what to think.
At what age?
And I wouldn't want my child.
Is there an age restriction in your mind?
To a school.
There's this
about teaching what?
Teaching sort of when it comes to teaching our past. There's this, and I think it's just coming basically through a racial lens. But there's this, parents are saying, "Hey, don't make my kid feel guilty," and I know a parent of color is going, "What are you talking about? I've got to teach reality."
Okay, so there's a lot to go over there, but let's focus on a few revealing statements. She said, quote, "I don't really understand this idea that parents should decide what's being taught. I'm not a professional educator. I don't have a degree in social studies or science. We send our children to schools because we want them to be taught by people who have expertise in a subject area, and that is not my job." That is not her job, she says. Moving on. Quote, when a governor or candidate said that he didn't think parents should be deciding what's being taught in school, he was panned for that. But that's a fact. This is why we send our children to school and don't homeschool. Because these are the professional educators who have the expertise, social studies, history, to teach science, to teach literature. And I think we should leave that to the educators, unquote. Okay, so first off, she has disqualified herself from offering her 1619 project as a curriculum if you take her at her word. She is not an educator, right? And only educators can tell children what to learn, according to her, right? Yet huge institutions are pushing that project to be the basis of school curricula throughout the country. Now, I don't think people with social studies degrees from schools of education have any special qualifications to decide what students should learn. You see, schools of education are notorious for the low quality of the students entering them. Here's an example. Even the good Dr. Jill Biden got a doctorate in education for a ridiculous dissertation featuring an embarrassing basic arithmetic error and precious little substance. This from the National Review. Miss Biden's only original research consists of interviews with two ex-students, and a few colleagues at Delaware Technical Community College, where she used to teach. Plus the results of a vacuous questionnaire she wrote that was returned by about 150 people who worked or studied there. Oh, and she also called two nearby community colleges seeking interviews about their retention rates. One of them wouldn't answer the question. The other wouldn't assign anyone to speak to her at all. Telling us about this misadventure serves no academic purpose whatsoever, though it does fill up 4 pages of her generously spaced paper. The transcripts of her group chats with campus figures and colleagues take up nearly 30 pages out of 129. The questionnaires eat up another 18 pages. The dissertation, Student Retention at the Community College Meeting Students' Needs, shimmers with the wan, term papery feel of middle school. Although in defense of today's middle schoolers, they at least know how to use spell check software, unlike Mrs. Biden. With intellectual leaders like Dr. Biden producing the expertise prized by Hannah Jones, how can one grant any authority over parents to holders of bachelor degrees in social studies? So the idea that parents have no role in deciding what their children should be taught is a repulsive dogma of those who worship the state as a religion. She knows damn well that expressing this view is what got Terry McAuliffe defeated in his bid to become governor of what has been of late a blue state, Virginia. Yet she so strongly believes in the myth of educators' expertise that she doubles down on the notion and even seems to regard homeschooling as morally wrong because parents don't have education degrees from preeminent institutions like the University of Delaware School of Education, the good Dr. Biden's doctoral alma mater. Yet homeschool graduates outperform public school graduates on nearly every single metric. But then again, when in the hell have these people ever really cared about that? The way I see it, there's absolutely no reason why this woman deserves the influence and honors she has reaped, other than serving the destructive agenda of the far radical left. Most of this came by way of the American Thinker. If you liked it, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, leave a comment down below. There's a PayPal link in the description box, so please put $1 in the bucket on the way out the door. I'd like to thank everyone for all your donations. They're much needed and much appreciated. Now, with all that being said, we'll see you next time.
Come on, move. Move. Easy, easy.